So this is the first panel where I am the one with the best shoes, basically.
Correct.
Everything is relative.
Here we go, surfer style.
Check.
We're good.
Going. Okay, I'm Giacomo Zucco. I'm a Twitter uncontroversial person, but I also do something else. I work for Bitcoin education mostly these days. I participated in a few startups since 2013, a famous Bitcoin wallet. I'm advisor and investor in a very few things from Galoy to Relay to Breeze to a mining pool that we maybe discuss about in a few months. And so, yeah, I'm doing stuff.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's John. You might not know me. I work on Bitcoin Core since about 5 years. One of the top 10 committers all time, but I don't really seek the limelight, so I just tend to just stay focused on the work and surfing to stay sane. So, yeah.
Hi, also a fellow surfer to stay sane. Yeah, Bitcoin can drive you insane. I am the founder of an exchange in Canada called Bull Bitcoin. I also founded a open source full node for enterprise API project called CypherNode, which aims to decentralize the economic node ecosystem. And yeah, I just care about Bitcoin decentralization a lot.
So I think that to start, we can try to list the centralization surfaces or vectors that we may discuss later. Typically, in the description of the panel, they mention the triangle of miners, developers, and nodes. So mining centralization is a very discussed topic. The point is that there is, but even inside that, there is some level of discussion. For example, there is the decentralization of production of ASICs, the decentralization of running ASICs in farm, and the decentralization of pools in order to bring the ASICs together. That's a huge topic of discussion.
Centralization of capital requirements.
And that's capital,
entry
right?
requirements. Yep.
That's capital also interacts with nodes. For example, if everybody is using an ETF that is actually moving a private key on top of a single node, everybody is trusting this node for consensus. But if everybody is checking on centralized services like block explorers, like Blockstream Info, and everybody is depending from there and not running a node, we also have another kind of centralization.
There's some physical latency of block propagation. Yeah. It's difficult.
So like a network kind of centralization. Then there is the centralization or decentralization of development. So who is deciding what's getting in the code or not, both on the consensus relevant side or the non-consensus relevant, so mempool policies. So I don't know why I'm the moderator now. Well, okay, let's keep going. Yeah. So as the moderator, I will ask you, which kind of centralization surface do you think is currently more scary or threatening?
I mean, I'm going to start by saying that as a developer, each developer has different priorities in their work. Mine has always been decentralization and robustness of Bitcoin on the base layer. That is my focus, because I believe that if you don't have decentralization and robustness of the code, then scaling doesn't matter. The other things, privacy, they don't matter if you aren't decentralized and robust, and those are the choices Bitcoin Core has always made in order to be more stable over time and long-lasting versus the other coins that will come up and say, hey, we're faster than Bitcoin, or we're more private than Bitcoin. So
yeah, I guess first observation is if you look at what node software people are running, it's overwhelmingly the Bitcoin Core software. So 99% of the nodes. There's very, very few other Bitcoin node implementations. There's Bitcoin Knots, which we run at Bull Bitcoin. We're probably the only Bitcoin exchange in the world that runs Bitcoin Knots. Very, very few other projects run Bitcoin Knots. We use it for specific things.
Bitcoin Knots by Luke Dash Jr.
By Luke Dash Jr. There's, Bcoin, but that's kind of nobody really runs that. There's BTCD. Again, nobody really runs that anymore. So first observation.
LibBitcoin is more experimental.
Yeah, LibBitcoin also experimental. So it's like overwhelmingly Bitcoin Core is the one software that people are running. And I guess what we're going to talk about is like is that a problem? So first, like the premise is Bitcoin Core is de facto monopoly on the node network. So we can start off with that. So
even inside this question, there are other questions like, for example, if it's a monopoly, is it a monopoly that requires or grants some level of arbitrarity? So for example, we can have a Bitcoin core that reaches some stable version, hypothetically, then it doesn't change anymore. It is a monopoly in the fact that everybody are running there, but it doesn't grant any specific power to any specific group because it's just status quo. While if you have a software that keeps changing and that requires continuous fixes, in that case you are dependent not just on a software, but on a group of people that can keep and must keep changing the software. And you cannot easily coordinate an alternative from them because you are dependent, basically. You have a lock-in.
It's important to distinguish between ossification on a protocol consensus layer and ossification of the code. You could stop doing consensus changes, but you still need to keep updating the code, fixing bugs, bit rot. When Tor switched, for example, 2 years ago from Tor v2 to Tor v3, if Bitcoin Core had not upgraded to Tor v3, you would no longer be able to run Bitcoin Core over Tor. So we have to keep up. In fact, a lot of my work was working on that, as well as adding privacy layers like CJDNS and I2P, which are also privacy networks which I encourage you to run your node over in addition to Tor for its robustness of your peer connections on the network. But we have to keep fixing bugs. We find them, we fix them. Sometimes we add some and then we fix them. It's a process.
Yeah, and when people talk about ossifying Bitcoin, I don't think anybody's talking about like stop committing to Bitcoin Core. They're talking about like the thing with Bitcoin Core is that historically it has been known as the reference implementation of the Bitcoin protocol. So like historically, if someone wanted to introduce a change to the Bitcoin rules via soft fork, the way to do that has been perceived as the first thing to do is to get that merged into Bitcoin Core, and then you get like people to run it. So from my perspective on the outside, Bitcoin Core has always been a very political project, potentially because it has this like near monopoly on the node. So for example, the first example of that was like the block size wars. You had definitely different cliques within Bitcoin Core developers. Mike Hearn, Jeff Garzik, Gavin Andresen were a clique of developers.
War was open. It was overt.
Yeah, and you had other developers within Bitcoin Core that wanted, that had different ideas. And the question is like, okay, so who gets to merge their change into Bitcoin Core? Whether or not merging your change into Bitcoin Core actually matters that much, that's like kind of another issue. But if you focus on that, it was very ambiguous as to who gets to decide what changes are merged into Bitcoin Core. And arguably, the block size war wasn't even about the block size. It was about who gets to control the merge. About power. There were a lot of this stuff is actually also like not very transparent, and we're going to talk about it. It's like still today, like even back in the day during the block size wars, there was private meetings between Bitcoin developers, between miners, between big industry leaders. I attended one of those meetings, and during one of those meetings, it was abundantly clear that there were some CEOs and business leaders that expressly wanted to replace the Bitcoin Core maintainers with new ones. So, like
that still goes on,
right? So obviously, like a faction lost, effectively, like one of the cliques of Bitcoin Core lost and was replaced by by other people. And like, so for example, we can talk about today. Like, so how who are the Bitcoin Core developers? Like who?
That's a good point. Like, where is a list, complete and reliable and up-to-date list of Bitcoin Core maintainers, if not contributors? So the list of the hierarchy of who can decide, at least on GitHub. Maybe I don't want to decide who decide. I wouldn't want to know who decides in Bitcoin, because that's an ambiguous question that implies a lot of economical consideration about what kind of node you're running, if you're updating or not. But on GitHub, if I make a pull request on Core, who is deciding that? And where I can find the list of the people deciding?
Do you want to take this, John? Uh-oh.
So, yeah.
But also use the mic, because you're trying to...
So this is one thing that I do personally is, when I arrived, I spent a lot of time studying the social process on Bitcoin Core. And it still is a focus of mine. I look at every interaction, every comment, every pull request opened, every pull request merged. I follow the discussion. This is a lot of time and it takes a lot of time to keep up, and there's very few people who do that. But it's important to me to understand who is driving what is the social process right now at this time of what is happening. My personal opinion is that maintainership has evolved a lot in the last 2 or 3 years of the project. There's been a complete sweep change from one set of maintainers to another with a very different set of characteristics.
Like before, for example, like how was it with Vlad, for example? How was it with Vladimir van der Laan?
Vladimir van der Laan was the lead maintainer for about a decade. And I'm going to be frank, he's the reason I was inspired to come work on Bitcoin Core. I liked his leadership style. He was humble, he was service-oriented, he was open-minded, tolerant. He was reluctant to use power in a heavy-handed way. I found him wise, kind, and that's the kind of leadership I like, and I set goals for myself that I don't reach, but I try to be kind, strong, and wise in the way I work, because you have to be patient, you have to be open, you have to not let yourself get triggered by people trying to provoke you or whatever is going on. I think it's also important to understand how few people are really behind some of these processes. Let's take Taproot activation. The Taproot soft fork activation was pretty acrimonious, and there was a couple dozen people who got really excited about it, participated very strongly. But how many people deeply reviewed the actual Taproot implementation? I will tell you it's far less, maybe a handful. It's not controversial, in my opinion, to state that Taproot was itself under-reviewed at the time of it being merged. And you should not be surprised that something unexpected like, say, ordinals were enabled to some extent by that. There's very few eyes actually on the code. A lot more people excited to talk about it.
Yeah.
Like BitVM that was basically discovered right now, that you can do basically XOR gate, NAND gate with Taproot.
But this is relying on a very small number of people who are actually willing to dig deep into the code and get all autistic on it and come up a few days later. You know, we're talking not many people.
Yeah, we're talking like 4, 5, 6 people.
A handful on something like that.
Yeah, and from my perspective also, I don't know what processes they're using. I don't know what logic they're using for agenda setting, and I don't think we're privy to a lot of the discussions that are happening.
This has also evolved. Yeah, what used to be very often public discussions on the Bitcoin Core Dev IRC channel, I would say in the last 2 years has mostly moved to back channels that we don't see, that are private conversations between people who are just more comfortable working in private with each other. And a lot of this stuff is no longer openly discussed. Yeah.
Also, I mean, we may have given the impression that all this debate is either technical, so about technicalities, or about power itself, like who gets to decide. But there may be other human dynamic things that are neither. For example, I remember there are cultural sides of development. I remember when there was the proposal to remove the word blacklist because it was racist and to change it with blocklist. So clearly that's something that only an American could spend any time on. Anybody else in the world would never spend time on that. So there is like some kind of geographical, cultural footprint on development that is clearly leading to like US, UK kind of environment.
I mean, when that happened, it sounds like kind of like a trivial, not important thing, changing the word blacklist to blocklist.
Definitely wasn't something we wanted to spend time debating.
And like from my perspective, I'm looking at this, and first of all, like this is high on the agenda, right? This is something that's high on the agenda. So how did this get on the agenda? And then you look at like the merge process, and it's like there's a PR, and it's like ack, you're in. You know, it was like a really quick like this, and it's like non-consequential, but it's also kind of weird because even the new word blocklist is like an ambiguous word, you know.
Especially
like,
in Bitcoin, where
it's like a list of blocks, right? Is it a list of blocks or is it a blocked list? You know, and we were talking about this before. Like the term whitelist has also been recently changed to.
It was quietly converted to no ban permissions instead of whitelist permissions.
And then you look at like, so who are the individuals that are doing this, and it's like, okay, so it seems to be a small group of people that are kind of like all friends.
This is also a very unimportant example, trivial.
Yeah.
Of things.
No,
Yeah, but it could be
it is, but
representative of something
Yeah.
which is not a technical debate
Yeah.
and not either who is in power.
Well, so-
it's more about a cultural sensitivity which is shared among a group of people.
Well, see, you look at people like Angela Welch, an academic like that, or the Wall Street Journal last February made this headline story, wasn't it, about the 6 shadowy supercoders who control Bitcoin Core. And historically, the maintainers, in my opinion, were just janitors. They were just supposed to merge after checking for themselves that everything was fine when there was enough review. And the reviewers were the true masters. Mm-hmm. The most rare talent is
Say masters. I mean, you probably
right,
should say-
masters.
not
Sorry.
supposed to use that word.
We don't use that word
Parents.
anymore.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, the top of the hierarchy, in my mind, was what we need the most. What is the most lacking? What is the bottleneck to progress is experienced review, deep review. And the maintainers would just, okay, it's ready to be merged. They would judge that, and they would merge it when there had been enough deep review. Their role was not to be gatekeepers.
Yeah. And the financing of core developers is also coming from like a limited amount of sources. Like, there's probably 2, 3, 4 organizations that are financing Bitcoin core developers.
Even if that improved, like compared to the block size wars, we had MIT, Blockstream, and a couple of others. Now probably we have a more decentralized funding mechanism. I mean, at least in my
Except it's all sourced from the United States.
Right.
But
Yeah,
other
it's-
than that, yes, it's much better.
Which is
It's
fun
much
because,
improved.
like, when moving to hash rate for a second, when hash rate was concentrated in China, everybody was concerned about centralization. Now that it's concentrated in the United States of America, that are home to the basically ultimate enemy of Bitcoin, which is the Federal Reserve, it's not a centralization problem anymore. Which is funny, right?
We had 7 maintainers leave. They were from all different places around the world. It was quite spread out and decentralized. Now we have, the last 3 were American, and in 3 of 4, there's only 4 now. We used to have 7. There's only 4, and 3 are in one office in London, and one is, or no, now 2 are in the New York region. So then it's now 5. I'd forgotten. We'd
So
added one.
maybe somebody listening, a good project would be a website where somebody try at least to infer who the Bitcoin core maintainers are in some moment in time. In one way, this is also an attack vector, because if somebody wants to sue them, let's not name names, or if somebody wants to...
Who could that be?
Yeah.
Ambiguity is also protection. It's harder to take over a process that nobody knows and nobody understands, and it's harder to try to attack them from the legal point of view. So there may be a good faith reason for some level of ambiguity or obscurity.
Well, there's an upcoming jurisprudence legal judgment coming up in the United Kingdom, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure when. The question they're going to judge, because they think it's important, even if Craig Wright is himself not considered to be a serious party, but they think the question of whether open source software and Bitcoin Core in particular is decentralized in its management is worthy of their purview in legal jurisprudence.
Mm-hmm. And I think like the smell test, is Bitcoin Core development decentralized? I think it would probably be no, right?
Well,
it's a fairly centralized
If the ruling
process.
goes the wrong way, Bitcoin Core developers could be held financially responsible for users' mistakes or uses,
and
legal or illegal of the software.
The group of people that are mostly non-anonymous, so they are liable for basically legal persecution, while Satoshi was not, which is a huge difference. And also that are basically in the same very few jurisdictions with their own kind of style of jurisdiction. In the case of the UK, explicitly retarded.
Yeah. And it's kind of like in academic peer review, if every peer reviewer is, ideologically in the same camp as you. So, for example, let's say that every peer reviewer is woke, and you have a academic paper which might be, a little bit on the woke side. Are the other peer reviewers really going to have an adversarial stance with you? So, I mean, that could be one potential threat vector where it's like, all right, so if all of the maintainers and all of the core developers, they're all friends, they're all woke, they all like hang out at the same parties, are they really acting as checks and balances between
There was
each other?
some guy having fun with that recently. There was
Yeah.
this physicist that created two papers. One contained a real result,
Yeah.
and he was basically skeptical about anthropogenic climate change. And he changed the result in a very obvious ways, with one that was ideologically fine, and the second one was accepted under a different name, and the first one was rejected, even if the true data was in the first one.
Yeah, like from the, I mean, I've been blocked by a bunch of Bitcoin core developers on Twitter for stuff that's probably not related to Bitcoin, stuff that's probably related to my stance on vaccines and my stance on masks and possibly my stance on, you know, conservative ideologies. And I mean, it's not that big of a problem unless it makes it more difficult for someone who is technically competent to join like this inner group of Bitcoin core maintainers, Bitcoin core developers. It might not be, I mean, they can't really, and like, does that matter? That's another question. Like, does it matter if Bitcoin core development is centralized or decentralized, other than, you know, legal potential reasons? I mean, everybody can run their own node, but it also, it matters in like who's setting the agenda, what the priorities are, and whose reviews are taken seriously, and whose PRs get merged.
Well, for example, the problem is maintainerships now have taken on an entirely new dimension. They've always been dynasties until the person burns out and quits after they're completely. Is that healthy? But it used to be that maintainers didn't merge their own work. They mostly spent most of their time reviewing other people's
So
work.
separation between working and merging, basically.
Yeah, and now what we see is before a maintainer might self-merge one thing a month, like every now and then. Now it's every day. Now I would say 80% plus of commits are made by the maintainers, and a high percentage of those are self-merges. Not always, it depends on who. And of course, they will always argue that, oh, but this wasn't an important merge. This we can just push right in. I'm just going to go ahead and merge this. There's always a justification. But the trend is very clear, and it has been since 2 years, when Vladimir stepped down. And there were people who were pushing for that. And that created a power vacuum, and we've seen an entire sweep of the maintainership.
Let me try to dispense some white pills about this, because we seem a little bit depressed about that. I think that there are at least three very healthy and optimistic trends. One, Bitcoin Core is still very important, still the reference implementation, but is reducing its scope over the year. For example, when Bitcoin started, the equivalent of Bitcoin Core had another name, but included mining, software, and everything. Then, with the advent of ASICs and pools, the mining part was stripped out. Then, with the advent of Android Wallet and Electrum, the wallet part, somebody still uses Core as a wallet, but very few. So the wallet part is basically stripped out. Now, basically, you still have that. With Lightning, all the Lightning functionality are not on Core, for sure. So now, inside Core, you basically have the network policies, mempool policies, peer-to-peer, and consensus.
Yeah, but there's debate about that as well. For example, the wallet maintainer on Bitcoin Core does not want to see the Bitcoin Core wallet stripped out, moved out to another project. But there are colleagues amongst the little club of maintainers that do want to see that pushed out. So there's internal debate. Some people would like it to see everything stripped out to separate projects and the contributors dispersed, except a royal ruling over just the consensus engine, which we are slowly, over many years now, trying to isolate in order to have it be usable by other projects on its own. There's modularity and isolation happening slowly over time. And this is a key project since 2 years now, 3 years now.
Lib consensus, right?
But there are maintainers who have said, literally, look, if we can't strip everything out and just have this and everybody else gets pushed out, I'm going to quit. I mean, there's politics like that going on that none of you see.
Yeah. You know, people are always free to run another node software, but again, you know, it's probably it's dangerous to run an alternative node software because you have less reviews, you have less eyes on it, and I guess it doesn't really matter if Bitcoin Core is super centralized or not, unless there's not enough review happening because people feel excluded.
There are bug fixes that are applauded, and there are bug fixes that piss people off.
Yeah.
Because of politics. Like if you find a bug, you better hope it's not by the wrong person who wrote it.
Yeah.
because you'll get gaslit. You might have trouble actually having it accepted as a bug. It might be just kind of minimized. But if you're find a bug by the right person, hey, awesome, good find, good job. Yeah. So
And
politics, in my opinion, should be gotten as much out of the project as possible, because Bitcoin is about reducing trusted third parties.
So another white pill. Clowns like charlatans like Craig Wright are using jokes of jurisdictions like the UK in order to sue developers. Okay, that's bad. But that will probably, over time, as a side effect of incentivizing Satoshi style of pseudonymity, which doesn't just mean I'm pseudonymous now, but also means that they have to dispose of my name eventually, and I basically have to recycle
Attacks right away, and it's merged very quickly, versus the other guy who just dies. That's a real thing.
This is an example. It will not go that way, especially in my case.
Right, but I mean, honestly, I've been doing this for 5 years. I have more commits than everyone but 7 people in the history of the project. I still, to this day, cannot tell you when I open a pull request a change. A pull request is a proposal to change something. I have no idea if it's going to be in quickly, in very slowly, or never, not at all.
Yeah, and like compare that to like, Lightning Network, you have 4 implementations that are kind of like, sometimes it seems like they're at war with each other, and they are, and that creates inefficiencies because, for example, if we're trying to get Bolt 12 implemented, maybe one implementation does it, the other one doesn't, the other one thinks it should be something else. They have different philosophies, so it's kind of like hard to maybe get compatibility amongst different implementations and wallets, but also it's pretty cool to have different implementations that are always, some of them are almost kind of like attacking each other.
Even creating the Bolt was pretty difficult. We had basically to hijack people in Milan for a week and force them to come out with the Bolt standard. So it was a very
But it's hard to have enough developer experience on a project on a separate implementation. I mean, what Luke does with Knots is he basically picks and chooses from the Bitcoin Core proposals. Some that don't get merged into Core, Luke will merge, and vice versa. But usually he's more merge friendly than.
But I think also we shouldn't put like core developers on a pedestal too much. I think
definitely not.
We've done that over the years. The core devs, they're so great. I mean, they are great, and
I don't like the label.
Right, the core dev.
No.
Yeah. But ultimately, if all the core devs were to disappear, like Bitcoin would not fail. At worst, you would have just like no bug fixes for a little while, and then other people are competent and capable of doing core development. So it's like no one's irreplaceable.
No,
in
absolutely
Bitcoin
not.
Core.
All the maintainers could disappear tomorrow, and there would be a reserve of either OGs or other colleagues. That brings me to a proposal I have that I've actually talked about throughout the community with different people, and I get a lot of support on this proposal, and it is this. For example, instead of having maintainership be super important for life until they burn out and commit and quit and resign, why not de-dramatize the whole thing and have a regular rotation where it's like jury duty, not something prestigious that people will suck up to you while you're in that power space until you quit. Why not have it be something like jury duty, where while you're up there, you dedicate yourself to not coding, not merging your own stuff, reviewing other people's work, filing and opening an issue if you see something that needs to be done rather than doing it yourself, delegating, reviewing, wise man work. Do it hard for 6 months until you get frustrated, and then rotate.
Which is also
a regular rotation.
Another example of something that will protect these people, because on one side you will get inefficiency because you just break a reputation hierarchy structure, and you also get ego deboosting because you cannot feel important. But
the journalists would no longer be able to say, hey, these 6 shadowy people.
It's a hard thing. You're already doing something mostly for free or for a very low pay, which is also hard to do, and you don't even get the glory. But on the other side, you don't even get the lawsuits because now it's not on you. So it could be a protective mechanism.
We're decentralized now. Yeah, I mean, it could be by random block hash, or it could be by some kind of quick consensus.
The problem there is that the most formal the procedure, the easier it is to try to attack it and to game it. Every procedure is gameable.
Well, there's what's called the GitHub team of people who are frequent, regular reviewers, and it's like 40 people, 50 people. It could be among these people a regular rotation.
So an initial whitelist or any kind of equivalent.
Well, it's already existing. It's the people who are authorized to vote on the priority projects of this next release.
Can you see this stuff on GitHub?
Yeah, it's,
Is there a
it's an open
function?
issue on GitHub.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an open vote. I mean, I don't really agree with voting on these sorts of things. Don't we reject kings and voting?
Especially because in that case, if everybody was a pseudonymous, we could have civil attacks on political stuff. Maybe you already have those, like Sock Puppet. You have that on poll on Twitter. People that will just create several accounts.
For me, this should be ad hoc. The review should be organic. People review what they want to review. We don't have to organize processes as like, let's all get together and vote on what we're going to review together, because people anyway don't. It's just more what happens when the maintainers, anyway, the maintainers are going to prioritize this merge over this merge if there's a merge conflict between the two. A merge conflict being that if I merge this one, this guy's going to have to reorganize his code. They do that anyway since forever. I just think it should be de-dramatized.
So we have
and rotated frequently.
Less than 5 minutes left. What about other centralization point? For example, a lot of talk about the ETF will centralize the market so that even if Bitcoin is Bitcoin and nobody's changing your node, but the market is looking at the price of this synthetic asset instead of yours. So even if you don't change your consensus, if the nodes that BlackRock uses to decide what Bitcoin is for them will change consensus, most of the market will be hijacked. Is that a possible centralization?
Yeah, definitely. Like economic node centralization has always been my biggest concern for Bitcoin, specifically in the context of consensus rule activation, whether it's soft forks or hard forks are not going to happen. There's a phenomenon where, okay, you have, let's say you have, I don't know, 100,000 people that are running nodes, but they're doing a fairly significantly small amount of giving value to Bitcoin, like giving economic value to Bitcoin. You have, I don't know, 2,000 Bitcoin services and exchanges that are either custodial or non-custodial, which people are trusting their nodes, right? So if I'm using like Kraken, I'm receiving coins on my Kraken account, like Kraken is validating that transaction. But these exchanges are also using another meta kind of like economic node, which is going to be something like either it's Prime Trust, either it's BitGo, it's going to be blockchain.info, Explorer. So you do have like a very small amount of nodes that are validating economically significant volumes of transactions. And
without considering chain analysis bullshit, because that could also, chain analysis is a pseudoscience that politicians are using to censor arbitrary transactions. And if implemented rigorously, that becomes a consensus of fork. Because, for example, chain analysis may just mean if you see a transaction that doesn't fit these arbitrary criteria that we just sell as science, but it's not, you just censor the transaction. Or it may be, if you see a block included this transaction, you have to disregard the block and to build on the next block. That's actually soft fork. That soft fork activated not by nodes, but by these overlays of legal bullshit.
Yeah, and obviously another issue is coins being whitelisted or blacklisted in the economy. So this is something that's definitely happening right now. There's a network of exchanges called the Trust Network, the Trust Protocol. And basically what's happening is there's some kind of discrimination happening between non-custodial wallets and what's called a hosted wallet, primarily caused by something called the travel rule. The travel rule is an international regulatory concept, which is that if you're sending Bitcoin or receiving Bitcoin to someone, you are supposed to know who is the beneficiary and who is the sender. Obviously, if you're an exchange and you're receiving Bitcoins from a user, like how do you know that the Bitcoin came from that user and not someone else? Like you can't really know. Well, you can know if that Bitcoin is coming from another regulated exchange. So inter-exchange transactions where the beneficiary and the sender are both KYC'd and both registered, and the two exchanges are communicating, these are becoming kind of like whitelisted transactions, whereas withdrawing Bitcoin from an exchange to a non-custodial wallet, that some exchanges are just not allowing that anymore. Like Gemini, for example, in the UK announced that they were going to reduce the ability to do those withdrawals. So centralization of coins within custodians that are KYC regulated custodians creates a kind of two-tier, like two-class systems. Some coins are considered to be more legit, and some coins are considered to be less legit. That is like a potential attack on Bitcoin fungibility.
Francis, I think we're almost out of time. Just a question for all you out there is raise your hand is Bitcoin decentralized enough? Yes. Is it decentralized enough?
Definitely decentralized enough. I'm going to answer. I think Bitcoin is decentralized enough because what's the point of decentralization is to be resistant to attacks.
Capture.
Right. So I mean, decentralization is not an end goal in itself. It's okay. So it's to make sure that transactions are not censored. It's to make sure that the rules don't change. That the 21 million cap limit is never modified, and it's to make sure that transactions that are paying the right fee are mined. And in that, has any attack been realistically successful or is realistically going to be successful because of the lack of decentralization? At this point, I don't really see one.
So is there how many think it could be more, should be more decentralized?
Yeah. Yeah, obviously. Yeah.
I don't think you can be decentralized enough.
No,
personally.
it can never be decentralized enough. There's like a
Whether a wallet or developer,
yeah,
no discriminating.
Yeah.
Even
no
if,
whitelisting.
and here I'm looking to my next panel tomorrow with Roxy, there are some parts of Bitcoin that are even too decentralized, like education and knowledge. There's too much noise, and I want to centralize everything. So in that case,
yeah.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.